Well, hello and good morning. Welcome to another Sunday Coffee with Dr. Childress here. Now, today I'm going to be obviously talking about betrayal. That's a theme in the family courts, and there's a reason why it's a theme, but ultimately the pathology comes from a rippling sex abuse, and that's a prominent theme in sex abuse is betrayal. But it's found its way into all aspects of the family courts, particularly in two domains: institutional um, betrayal, institutional capture, regulatory capture, and um, and then betrayals within the family having to do with loyalty. And loyalty is very important in the family uh, for functioning and for roles and various things. But in the family courts, there's a loyalty conflict. It's being weaponized. Family loyalty is being weaponized. So let's start here by talking about the two different types of betrayal that are in the family courts. The first prominent one is institutional betrayal trauma, and that's for you parents out there and your children. Um, it's a trauma, and the whole aspect, everything about the family courts is a trauma pathology. It's child abuse, that's trauma. It's complex trauma. It's spousal abuse, that's complex trauma. It's institutional betrayal trauma. We're most definitely in the trauma zone. And so institutional betrayal trauma was first identified by Freud, and it, in the family courts, it has to do with the institutions of professional psychology, the American Psychological Association, and the licensing boards, and that's the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards. Um, and their failure to respond to the unethical practices in the family courts that are leading to the financial exploitation of parents on a massive scale by the psychologists. Uh, then the second has to do with family betrayal, and the primary family systems person on family uh, loyalties is Berzermain Nagy and his book Invisible Loyalties. And when a child is rejecting a parent, that represents a betrayal of loyalty within the family. And we'll start, though, by talking about the institutional betrayal, the one who should protect and doesn't. Uh, that's just devastating in the family courts, and that's keeping everybody locked into the pathology. And this is the article by Smith and Freud back in 2014 entitled Institutional Betrayal. And it's in the American Psychologist. Now, the American Psychologist Journal is the flagship journal of the American Psychological Association. So, this is in the American Psychological Association's flagship journal about institutional betrayal. And guess who's betraying the parents and children in the family courts? The American Psychological Association, and it's led to hundreds of thousands of undiagnosed and untreated child abuse and spousal abuse cases in the family courts because they are experimenting with this new quasi judicial role for doctors and a experimental assessment procedure called a forensic custody evaluation. That needs to stop. We need to get back to clinical psychology diagnosis and treatment. We have child abuse, spousal abuse, a dark triad, vulnerable dark triad, dark tetrad personality, most malevolent humans on the planet, narcissistic, psychopathic, highly manipulative, sadistic, in the family courts, undiagnosed, untreated, creating the child abuse and spousal abuse, undiagnosed and untreated. And the unethical practices are off the charts. A violation of 2.01 boundaries of competence and attachment, delusional thought disorders, family systems, a bunch of them, complex trauma. That leads to a violation of 2.04 in the APA Ethics Code, leads to a violation of 9.01 bases for assessment, and 3.04 avoiding harm. There's a cascade of 4 ethical violations in the family court, plus 8.01, the failure for institutional review board oversight of this experiment of forensic custody evaluations. It's a nightmare in the family courts. Institutional betrayal, and they know. I've told them on a petition to the APA signed by 19,000 parents, and most recently on a complaint regarding 4 prominent forensic psychologists. So I've documented them into the record. Absolutely. This is where we're headed. Because the system is flawed, it's inverted, and there's no solution as long as there's regulatory capture and institutional betrayal. So here's Gemini description of institutional betrayal. Jennifer Freyd's concept of institutional betrayal refers to wrongful actions or inactions by institutions, university, workplaces, military, that harm individuals dependent on them, such as covering up abuse or failing to respond to reports. It extends betrayal trauma theory and causes significant mental health issues, often being more damaging than the initial incident. This is pretty devastating, what's happening in the family courts. And in creating, this is for me, in creating and fostering a forensic custody evaluation industry in the family courts, the forensic psychologists, the American Psychological Association, the APA, and the state licensing boards, the ASPPB, are betraying their obligation to protect children from child abuse and parents from spousal abuse by a pathological ex-spouse and parent who is using the child as a spousal abuse weapon. Can I be any more clear? So my next step is to start writing journal articles for ethics journals, for clinical journals, for forensic journals about the institutional betrayal. Now, Jennifer Freyd also has a Center for Institutional Courage. And so I'm going to be looking into potentially collaborating with them on this. And I am recommending that the parents and your allies initiate a class action lawsuit and name the 50 state licensing boards, the American Psychological Association, the AFCC, Association of Family Conciliation Courts, and the prominent forensic custody evaluators as co-defendants, and then settle out with the state licensing boards, the states, and the APA to correct the situation in the family courts, to stop the forensic custody evaluations. They are a nightmare. Stop them and then get the training back and clinical psychology back, diagnosis and treatment to solve the pathology in the family courts. It's gone on for 40 years, unsolved child abuse, spousal abuse. We need to get a handle on it. And so that's where I'm headed. Now, if there is a class action lawsuit, I may be a testifying expert. So you guys need to generate that. That's not in my domain. I've done everything. I've documented everything into the record. And so it's up to you now. Here's from the New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluations, the only oversight these custody evaluations have ever received. In some custody cases, because of a lack of evidence or inability of parties to pay for expensive challenges of an evaluation, defective reports can thus escape a meaningful scrutiny and are often accepted by the court with potentially disastrous consequences for parents and children. They are talking about the activity of psychologists having potentially disastrous consequences for parents and children. Why are these allowed to happen? Stop them. No, they should not happen. They produce defective reports. I am the meaningful scrutiny. I get to read them. I agree 100%. They need to be stopped. This whole forensic custody evaluation industry needs to be stopped. But the moment it does, you will realize there are no clinical psychology services in the family courts. These families have no mental health services that are competent. They're just making stuff up over in the family courts. It is so bad. So, more from the New York Blue Ribbon Commission. By an 11-9 margin, the majority of commission members favor elimination of forensic custody evaluations entirely, arguing these reports are biased and harmful to children and lack scientific or legal value. At worst, evaluations can be dangerous, particularly in situations of domestic violence and child abuse. Again, they are not talking about the pathologies, they are talking about the psychologists. The psychologists are dangerous. The psychologists are harmful to children. The 9 who voted against eliminating them, they didn't say the forensic custody evaluations were okay. They just wanted some mental health services in the family courts. The 11 who voted to eliminate them would rather have no mental health services in the family courts than what they are receiving from mental health, from the American Psychological Association, from the licensing boards, from the various agencies, of various oversight agencies for all the master's level. That is a stunning indictment of the mental health services in the family courts when the only review ever conducted determined that they would rather have no mental health services rather than what they're receiving. And the licensing boards, where are they? 40 years, where are they? That's called regulatory capture. That's Stigler. More from the New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluations. These members reached the conclusion that the practice is beyond reform and that no amount of training for courts, forensic evaluators, and/or court personnel will successfully fix the bias, inequity, and conflict of interest issues that exist within the system. The conflict of interest is phenomenal. You have the custody evaluators controlling the licensing boards. You have them control on the APA. You have them infiltrated everywhere. And the AFCC is their megaphone for promoting their practice of forensic custody evaluations. It needs to stop. The New York Blue Ribbon Commission, where are the licensing boards protecting the public? The incompetence. You want to know the incompetence? Go get any forensic custody evaluator Vita. Ask your AI to look for competence based on their education, training, and experience in attachment pathology. A child rejecting a parent is attachment pathology, and delusional thought disorders. The differential diagnosis is a persecutory delusion in the allied parent. They are psychotic. They have a major psychiatric disorder, and it's not being diagnosed. Delusional disorders are in the same category as schizophrenia. This is a serious psychiatric disorder, plus factitious disorder imposed on another child abuse diagnosis. They have 2 psychiatric disorders that aren't being diagnosed by these custody evaluators. Look on their Vita. Get your AI to look on their Vita for competence in attachment delusions. You will not find it. Up on my website, up on my Substack, I've done that with ChatGPT-4. You can download that training protocol and that assessment of 6 top forensic custody evaluators who were instructors for an AFCC course, plus 2 additional top tier forensic custody evaluators who literally wrote the book on how to do it. None of them are competent in attachment or delusions, and yet they are the ones who are running the show. It is a nightmare. It needs to stop. It cannot be reformed. It needs to stop. Dangerous, harmful to children. Yeah, so look at these descriptors. Dangerous, harmful to children, lack scientific or legal value, defective reports, potentially disastrous consequences for parents and children. The practice is beyond reform. How long will the licensing boards be inactive? How long will the APA be non-responsive to this situation? You need to pull them, get an IRB review. An IRB review would never pass it, would never approve it. Institutional Review Board. Right? Why? So what are we looking at? We're looking at regulatory capture, and that's Stigler. The failure of state licensing boards to protect the children and their parents from the negligently incompetent, unethical, and harmful practices of the forensic custody evaluators represent a textbook case of regulatory capture, Stigler, as described by Carpenter and Moss. So now let's shift gears a little bit. So I have to calm down a little bit on that now. But you will not get a solution to the family courts. The child abuse will continue. Everything will continue until we free the system from this experiment by the forensic custody evaluations and return to actual clinical diagnosis and treatment and solve it. So we have to get rid of the forensic custody evaluations. But now here's the situation in the families. Loyalties are really important. They structure relationships and hierarchies within the family and promote bonding. And there's just as a ground to understanding this, there's 4 types of relationship in the family. And they depend on gender, the gender of the parent and gender of the child. 2 of those are cross-gender relationships. Those are your high affection bonds. That's your father-daughter and mother-son. 2 of the bonds are same-gender bonds. Those are your identity bonds. That's father-son and mother-daughter. And so in the family, when you have a child rejecting a parent, you have basically in the child's development, the child is acquiring information about 2 domains of attachment bonding and selfhood. The first, on the cross-gender relationships, they are developing a sense of value. So those are your high affection bonds, mother, son, and father, daughter. And those are associated with the term mirroring, that the child looks in the face of the parent and sees a mirror for who they are, their value. And so for the young daughter, that's a value to men in the society. Does she have value? And for the mother-son bond, it's the same way. For the same gender bonds, that's going to build up networks in the identity region of the attachment system. So the attachment system has 2 areas, 2 sets of networks to acquire information from differing people in the child's world. So now when we have a same gender rejection, that's going to create problems in the identity networks, because I don't care how well the cross-gender mother-son or father-daughter is doing, and it's not doing well in this when there's a rejection of the other parent. But I don't care how well it's doing. I know for a fact if a child is rejecting, the same gender parent, son's rejecting his dad or daughter the mother, the same gender identity networks are being devastated, absolutely devastated. So this is not a system of pathology we can tolerate. Half the child's attachment networks for love and bonding are a train wreck. When a child is rejecting a parent, we have to fix the pathology. And the same is true when we go the other direction. If you have a mother or a daughter rejecting her mother, or a son, or the opposite, the cross-gender here, if you have a daughter rejecting her father, or the son his mother, that's the value networks. He's supposed to be getting high affection on those networks, and instead they're getting no affection. That's devastating to their cross-gender networks. So again, I don't care what's happening in the alive parent. I know for a fact I've got decimated attachment system just when a child's rejecting a parent. This is not normal. In the general population, you do not see a child rejecting a parent. This is severely pathological. It's caused by a psychiatric disorder in the allied parent, a delusional disorder, a psychotic disorder in the allied parent. It's psychological child abuse. This is something we need to get on and fix and restore the child's healthy development, not take months and months of doing a custody evaluation or doing ineffective treatment or no diagnosis. This is phenomenally bad what's going on. And just to point out, just because, one half of the system is a mess, that doesn't mean the other half of the system is not also a mess. So when you have a psychotic, delusional, it's encapsulated, but you got a delusional allied parent, that's going to mess up whatever networks they're working on as well. So the child's attachment networks are an absolute train wreck with this pathology. So let's talk a little bit more specific about the situation. Now, if you go over to my YouTube channel or website on the YouTube section, I have some vignettes that I'll walk through the various combinations of things in the narcissistic pattern and the borderline pattern to this. But basically, now I'm talking patterns here, not specific, but basically in the patterns. When you get a same gender betrayal, let's talk about those two. The first one is the daughter rejecting the mother. That's the incest pattern. That's where you get a special relationship between the father and the daughter that excludes the mother. Now, again, I'm not saying there's actual incest in that relationship. That's the pattern. The father and the daughter in a special relationship excludes the mother. That's going to have tremendously destructive consequences on the daughter's psychological development to replace her mother in her father's special affections. So symbolically underneath unconscious stuff, that's not a good thing. We need to, I love high affection coming on the father-daughter line. Oh, that's the high affection bond. But we need the balancing influence of the mother in that situation. Otherwise, it starts to get uncomfortable and problematic, psychologically problematic. Again, I'm not saying there's incest. I'm saying that's the pattern, though, psychologically. Now, it's the same thing for the son rejecting his father, except gender reversed. So that's called the Oedipal pattern. That's where the son defeats his father to win his mother's special affections. So again, that's going to have like difficult psychological consequences for a son who's got the identity bond with his father and now is fighting his father to overcome him and be his mother's protector. And so he wins her special affections. Oh, mommy, you're so wonderful. And dad, you're unprotected. That's psychologically a problem for the kid. Okay. And it's, well, we'll go on to the other two, and then we'll talk about loyalty issues. So then in the cross-gender betrayal with the son rejecting his mother, that's the values bond. So that's the son who's now unlovable. He doesn't feel loved by his mother and that's where the child feels they are of no value to be loved. I mean, that's the boy's mother. And he's not feeling loved by his mother of value. That's going to have tremendously impactful destructive impact on his psychological development. He's going to have mommy issues for the rest of his life around the rejection of that mother-son bond. And then the same thing with the daughter rejecting the father, that she's unlovable to men, to the other gender, that she doesn't feel loved by her father. And that's what we want. We want children to feel loved. But now this child doesn't feel loved. They feel like their parent is a danger to them and that they are of no value to be loved. And that's immensely destructive to the child's, before I leave that's immensely destructive to the child's healthy development, to no matter how it plays out. Now, the other feature about this whole situation is loyalty. And when a child rejects that beloved parent, and it is a beloved parent, because the attachment system is a motivational system. All motivational systems have direction. The child wants to bond to their mother and father. That's a motivational system. The other direction is death by starvation and predation. That's a motivational system. The child wants that parent. The child wants to feel loved by that parent. They want to feel loved by their mom. They want to feel loved by their dad for kind of a little bit different reasons based on the gender composition of things, but they want to feel loved. That's a base of security for them in their world. And here we have a situation where the child doesn't feel loved. And if you ask them, they'll say, "Oh, well, they don't deserve to be loved by me." It's just perverted. That's the influence of that pathological narcissistic borderline parent. You deserve, if you know, to be rejected because you're inadequate. Here's the actual value system. We're not nice to other people because of who they are. We're nice because of who we are. Okay, that deserves to be rejected. That's a spousal abuse theme. Of course I hit her. She deserved it. My dinner was cold. People deserve cruelty. Nobody deserves cruelty. That's that dark narcissistic value system. People deserve cruelty because of their inadequacy. And that's what the child is acquiring from that pathological parent, that value. My targeted parent deserves to be rejected by me. That's not the proper framing or understanding. The child doesn't feel loved by that parent. We need to get that child feeling loved by that parent. And then when I go over to talk to the targeted parent, they want to love their child. Oh my gosh, they just want to do that so much. So we just need to open the channels to that. But when that child who loves that parent, loves their mom, loves their dad, but then must reject that parent, that's a betrayal of loyalty to that parent. And whether it's on the high affection bond of a daughter rejecting her beloved father, and she wants to love him, but now she has to reject him, that's a betrayal of his love. That's a betrayal of the son, of his mother's love. And holy cow, that's a big bond. She gave that boy life, or the daughter, when it goes the same gender. That the mother brought that child into the world, and now the child is rejecting that mother who carried her, who raised. That's a tremendous loyalty conflict. If you think out in the general population, you know, that loyalty to your family, to your parents, we can see that in you know the news, you know, that's going on right now. That bond between the child and the parent, and how distressed and we take care of our parents and all that sort of stuff, is tremendous. And then the child betrays that. Oh, that's tough psychologically for the child. Now they have to start creating all sorts of defenses inside relative to that. And that makes treatment down the line even more difficult. If we get into the now adult children, that betrayal of loyalty and guilt around that is a treatment related issue. We need more specialized understanding in the treatment professionals. Absolutely. And so that's a tremendous psychological damage to the child, to be put in a position. Now, the allies of the pathology will come in and say, "Oh, well, that targeted parent deserves it because they were too insensitive, they're cruel, they're this or that." All right, no worries. Let's assess it and fix it. Okay, if that's an actual fact, let's assess it and fix it. On all my recommended treatment plans, I have a wonderful dad or wonderful mom bullet point number 1. We'll turn the targeted parent into a wonderful parent. Yay, everything's solved. But that's not going to resolve it. That's not solved for the allied parent or their allies. They'll keep arguing, keep fighting. No, we can't do that. We can't fix it. We can't treat it. We can't solve it. Yes, we can. If there's a problem with the parent, that's the easiest possible solution. We just redirect the parent, solve the parent, and everything's solved. So if it's actually the parent, the targeted parent, that's an easy fix. Especially I go talk to that parent and they say, absolutely, I want to change. I'll do anything. I love that child. It's 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, we fix everything. Returning back to the situation of institutional betrayal, if we get a diagnosis, an accurate diagnosis of the persecutory delusion in the allied parent, the child abuse, spousal abuse, this is pathology is treatable within 6 to 12 weeks. Okay, so yeah, a month and a half, 3 months, absolutely, we can resolve the whole thing. And you, wonderful dad, wonderful mom, bullet point for the targeted parent, and yeah, we can fix it. We fix the parent, we fix the child. That the idea that this stuff goes on for years in the family courts, when hundreds of thousands of dollars from parents fighting this with lawyers' fees and trials, and the child's childhood is destroyed in custody conflicts and rejecting parent, is an abomination, an absolute abomination, and is caused by the forensic custody evaluators not protecting the child. This is child abuse. This is spousal abuse. You got a dark personality, dark triad, dark tetrad, vulnerable dark triad. Dark triad is narcissistic, psychopathic, and Machiavellian levels of manipulation. Add sadism to that, you get the dark tetrad, narcissistic, psychopathic, manipulative, and sadistic. And that's the personality we have in the family courts. The other variant is the vulnerable dark triad. That's vulnerable narcissism, type 2 psychopathy, that's the manipulative part, and borderline traits. Okay, so you got the borderline spectrum, you got the narcissistic spectrum of the pathology, and it's not being diagnosed and it's not being treated. We know narcissistic and borderlines collapse into persecutory delusions under stress. We know that. And the divorce is a stress, and the attachment. Oh my God, we need to get on this with diagnosis and treatment. 6 to 8 weeks, it's complete. It's out of the courts. It's solved. We have a healthy bond and a healthy childhood. 6 to 8 weeks. The moment we stop forensic custody evaluations and return to actual clinical diagnosis and treatment, what doctors should be doing. There's your institutional betrayal. So I've documented everything in. I recommend you go take a look at Claude Exhibit 23, which is Claude's analysis of the institutional betrayal. And that's part of a larger Claude dialogue I had that is available. Exhibit 22 is about the parental alienation experts. Exhibit 23 is about the institutional betrayal. And Claude does a great description of what's going on. And that has to do with the now adult survivors of family court custody conflict and the parent survivors of traumatic grief and the loss of their children. So when we fix this, when we ultimately step up with institutional courage and fix this, we can't abandon those children who went through this and are now adults and are kind of lost in their psychological traumas, their institutional traumas and things. And Claude will explain all that. And we can't abandon the parents who lost their children and now are suffering with traumatic grief. We need to go back and re-get them. That's where the APA needs to start training people up, and we need to institutional courage. The APA, the state licensing boards, need to step up to the fact that for 40 years they failed the parents and children in the family courts. And that's going to take likely a class action lawsuit. So that's what I start with Claude talking about. Is I say, Claude, I'm a clinical psychologist, you're an AI, neither one of us is an attorney, but from where I sit, class action looks like a reasonable consideration. Claude said, well, here's the considerations on that. And then we go into talking about the way that would help solve the institutional betrayal trauma, institutional courage, for the now adult children and their parents. And if you want to know the extent of the issue, there's a scandal coming. I'm telling you, the moment they stop forensic custody evaluations, the scandal is going to follow. That the number of abused children across 40 years of experiment in forensic custody evaluations, Gemini estimates over 40 years there have been 480,000 cases of undiagnosed child abuse in the family courts. Grok estimates it as 1.6 million. And I've got a blog up, The Experiment on Children and Parents, where I talk with the AI and give you the AI data. You can do that on your own. And that's what the blog talks about. You just get an AI and you run the numbers, estimate the number of children, new families in divorce with children, estimate the number who go into high conflict, estimate the number of those who are child rejecting a parent for a year, and then multiply it by 40 years since 1980s of these forensic custody evaluation experiment. If let's just pick a number of 25,000 cases a year of high conflict divorce situations in the United States, 50 states, 25,000 a year, high conflict divorce. It goes on, and highly litigated divorce issues. Then in 10 years, that's what, 250,000? In 40 years, that's a million. Wow. Take a lower number. Okay, say 10,000. That's 40,000. And, or 10,000 a year would be 100,000 times 4 years, 400,000 children and parents, abused children and parents. 400,000. That dwarfs this Catholic Church sex abuse scandal. We have 400,000 cases of undiagnosed child abuse in the last 40 years because of the forensic psychologists who are doing something dangerous, harmful to children, lacks scientific and legal value, and results in potentially disastrous consequences. And we're letting it go on even now. And it's like, we know the New York Blue Ribbon Commission, the moment that came out, we should have pulled forensic custody evaluations until we get an IRB review of them. Where are the licensing boards? And now, finally, and I'll wrap up here, is that there are other incompetence exhibits. They're in the record, Exhibit 16. That's my letter, standard 1.04. When I believe there's an ethical violation to 6 prominent AFCC instructors for an AFCC sponsored class. You can go look at that letter and look at the ethical concerns involved with that course they taught. Then Exhibit 17 is the response of those 6 instructors to that letter. And you can see how inadequate it is. Basically, they're saying all the allegations and concerns are true, because they don't have a defense against them. They just say, well, we're okay. No, that's not true. 1 page, just basically, nope, not true. All righty. And then my Exhibit 18 is my APA Ethics Committee complaint. And you can look at that. The APA Ethics Committee says we don't review things until after the licensing board. So now there's 6 licensing board complaints in. And then Exhibit 19 was the AFCC Board of Directors notification, and that's all pursuant to my standard 1.05 to take further action appropriate to the situation, notifying a state or national committee on professional ethics, appropriate institutional authority, and state licensing boards. So I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So where are the licensing boards in the APA? They're not even responding. They're just dead. They're just dormant. Nothing. No life in them. You're going to have to get a class action lawsuit to activate them up to do the right thing, because the current situation is an abomination in the family courts. But I've discharged my duty to protect. Okay, that's what the December hearings was about, was me discharging my duty to protect to the state boards. And so as soon as we're past this situation, no matter what happens to me, I'm free. that it's no longer my obligation. I'm no longer carrying the duty to protect. So you guys, good luck to you. I'll still be around in the family courts and I'll still be reviewing stuff and doing stuff, but I've done everything I can possibly do on this situation. Next step is for me to write the journal articles and books and all that sort of stuff, and maybe move over to AI psychology if I can get over there. So, which is another, ooh, that's a seriously problematic domain, AI psychology and what's going on with stuff in our world in that zone. So we'll talk to you later. Good luck to everybody out there. I'll talk to you next Sunday about some other aspect of the family court situation.